The first thing Serenity noticed wasn't the sight of the room, but the smell. It was rich, layered, a blend of sandalwood, aged leather, and the metallic tang of expensive air conditioning. The air was thick with the scent of money, sharp and unfamiliar, nothing like the bleach and lemon industrial cleaner that usually clung to her skin after a long shift. She blinked, slowly opening her eyes. Light streamed through massive floor-to-ceiling windows, burning her retinas with the sharp morning sun. For a heartbeat, she lay frozen, staring up at a ceiling so high it made her dizzy. Her head swam. The bed beneath her was too soft, Egyptian cotton, the kind that felt like woven water against her skin. But this wasn't her cramped apartment in Queens. This wasn't her lumpy mattress. This was, wrong, panic, cold and sudden, gripped her chest. Where was she? Why did it feel like she was suffocating in luxury, a life she didn't belong to? Her body trembled as she sat up, her heart pounding with fear. She was wearing an oversized charcoal gray t-shirt that didn't belong to her. The scent of expensive cologne lingered faintly on it. And then, the worst realization, she was alone. Malik, her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, but it felt like a scream. The terror in her chest surged. Her 5-year-old son, where was he? She had brought him to work with her the night before because she couldn't afford the late babysitter fees. But now, he was gone. The events of the previous night were a blur. Malik's fever spiking in the supply closet, the angry voices coming from the executive wing, her decision to investigate. And then nothing. Frantically, she scrambled out of bed, her bare feet sinking into plush wool carpet, the unfamiliar luxury suffocating her. "Malik," she shouted, her voice rising in pitch, her pulse hammering in her ears. Fear consumed her as she rushed through the doorway into a living room larger than her entire apartment. Glass walls opened up to Central Park, abstract sculptures worth millions scattered across the floor. Furniture that looked too uncomfortable to sit on. But Serenity wasn't looking at any of that. Her gaze locked on the center of the room, the single figure that froze her in place. Darius Sterling. The ruthless CEO of Sterling Corp, the man she cleaned for every night, earning a fraction of the amount it took to live in this world. A man whose reputation for firing executives for a single misstep was legendary. And here he was, sitting in a deep leather armchair, bathed in morning light. But that wasn't what made her stop. What stopped her cold was the sight of Malik, her son, curled in Darius's arms, sleeping soundly against the broad chest of a man she feared. The CEO, who was known for his icy, detached demeanor, was cradling her sick child, his hand gentle as it rested on Malik's small back. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Darius wasn't looking at the child. He was looking at her. His eyes, dark, impassive, as cold as obsidian, met hers with an unsettling calm, as if this scene were as normal as breathing. Her throat tightened. "Get away from him," Serenity hissed, the words ripping out of her like a mother's primal instinct. She didn't care that he was a billionaire. She didn't care that he was untouchable. If he harmed her son, she would tear this penthouse apart with her bare hands. "Give me my son." Darius didn't flinch. He didn't even move. He simply raised a finger to his lips, a chilling gesture for silence. "Quiet," he commanded, his voice deep and low, vibrating through the floorboards. He just fell back asleep. His fever broke an hour ago. Serenity froze. "What did you do to him? Why am I here?" Darius adjusted Malik's small form in his arms, his gaze lingering on the child just a moment longer than necessary. Then he turned to look at Serenity, his face as cold as stone. "You're here because you have terrible timing, Ms. Jones," Darius said, his tone flat, devoid of any emotion. "If you had stuck to cleaning the toilets on the 40th floor instead of wandering into the executive suite last night, you'd be home right now." The memory slammed into her like a freight train. The open door to his private office, the people inside who shouldn't have been there, the sleek metal briefcase on the desk. And then Darius, catching her in her janitor jumpsuit, mop in hand. I didn't see anything, she stammered, her voice shaking. I just came to empty the trash. Darius let out a short, humorless laugh. It was like ice cracking. Don't insult my intelligence. You saw enough, and more importantly, they saw you. Who saw me? The men I was meeting with. Men who don't like loose ends. Darius stood up slowly, as if cradling Malik in his arm was the easiest thing in the world. He walked past Serenity, heading toward the massive window, his back to her as he looked out at the city. Look down there, he ordered. Serenity hesitated before stepping toward the glass. Below, the street was alive with the hum of morning traffic. A black SUV idled across the street, parked near a fire hydrant, its tinted windows like dark eyes staring back at her. They've been there since 4 a.m., Darius said, his voice flat. They're waiting for you to leave this building. They know your name. They know your address in Queens. They know where Malik goes to kindergarten. The words hit Serenity like a gut punch. Her knees went weak. She grabbed the back of a sofa to stay upright. The threat was real, physical, and she was trapped. You're lying, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You're just trying to scare me. Why? What do you want? Darius turned from the window, his silhouette dark against the bright sky. He walked toward her, each step calculated, cold, as though he knew she couldn't escape. I wish I were lying. It would make my morning a lot easier. He stopped right in front of her, his cold eyes sweeping over her, analyzing every move, every expression. Here's the reality of your situation, Serenity. Because of what you witnessed last night, you're now a liability. Those men out there, they don't take chances on witnesses. If you walk out that door, you and your son won't make it to the subway station. His words settled into her chest like heavy stones. So, until I handle this situation, you're not going anywhere. You are my guest, or my prisoner, call it whatever makes you sleep better. Serenity stared at him, horrified. She was trapped in a golden cage with a man she feared, hunted by strangers she didn't know. You can't keep us here, she cried, her voice cracking. This is kidnapping. No, Darius said calmly, his grip on Malik tightening. This is survival. The elevator codes have been changed. The stairwell doors are locked. My security team has been instructed not to let you leave. You're stuck here, Serenity. Darius's eyes flickered to Malik once again, and for a brief moment, something that resembled regret flashed in his gaze. But it was gone in an instant. Welcome to your new home. Welcome to your new home. The words hung in the opulent silence of the penthouse, heavier and colder than the marble floors beneath Serenity's bare feet. She stared at Darius, her mind racing, trying to comprehend the terrifying reality he had just laid out. Kidnapping, hitmen, a golden prison. It felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Her eyes flicked from the impassive face of the billionaire CEO to the sleeping form of her son in his arms, then to the expansive windows that showed the city below, a city that suddenly felt full of hidden dangers. You're insane, she whispered, her voice trembling but growing steadier as she tried to grasp the absurdity of it all. You can't just lock people up because it's convenient for you. I have a life. I have a job. Malik has school. Darius walked past her, carrying Malik toward a large plush sofa. His movements were deliberate and unhurried, a stark contrast to Serenity's frantic energy. He gently laid Malik down, tucking a cashmere throw blanket around him with a care that seemed completely out of place for the ruthless man standing before her. Your life, as you knew it yesterday, no longer exists, Serenity, Darius said, straightening up and facing her. His voice was low, devoid of empathy. Your job is gone. I had you fired this morning for security violations. Malik's school has been notified that he is withdrawn due to a family emergency. Your landlord has been paid 3 months' rent in advance to keep him from asking questions. You are, for all intents and purposes, off the grid. Serenity felt like she'd been punched in the gut. He had erased her entire existence in a matter of hours. The control he wielded was terrifying. "You had me fired." She choked out, her eyes stinging not from sadness but from rage. That job was everything. It put food on the table, it paid for Malik's medicine. At the mention of medicine, Darius's expression shifted subtly. He walked over to a sleek modern sidebar and poured himself a glass of water from a crystal pitcher, not offering her any. "Let's talk about Malik's medicine," he said, taking a slow sip. "He has severe asthma. You're 3 months behind on payments to the specialist clinic in Queens. They were about to cut you off. Last night in that supply closet, he was struggling to breathe because you were rationing his inhaler. Am I correct?" Serenity felt the blood drain from her face. The shame hit her like a physical blow. "How did he know?" "You spied on me," she accused, her voice shaking. "I did my due diligence on the people currently residing in my home," Darius corrected coldly. "The point is, Serenity, out there, you were barely surviving. You were putting your son at risk because you were too proud or too stubborn to ask for help. In here, that changes." He set the glass down with a sharp click that echoed in the quiet room. "While you are under my roof, under my protection, Malik will receive the best medical care money can buy. A pediatric pulmonologist from Mount Sinai is on his way here right now to assess him. His prescriptions will be filled and delivered. He will eat organic, nutritious food prepared by a private chef. He will sleep in a clean, dust-free environment. He will be safe and he will be healthy." Darius stepped closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to look up at him. His dark eyes bore into hers with an intensity that made her stomach twist. "That is the deal, Serenity. You stay here, you keep your mouth shut about what you saw, you don't try to run, and your son gets to live a normal, healthy life. You leave, and you're back on the street with hitmen on your tail and a sick child you can't afford to treat. It's not a difficult choice." It was emotional blackmail in its purest form. He was using her love for her son as a weapon, wrapping a cage in the promise of safety and health. Serenity hated him in that moment, hated his wealth, his arrogance, his terrifying control over her life. But as she looked over at Malik, peacefully sleeping on a couch that probably cost more than her car, his chest rising and falling without the usual wheeze, she knew Darius was right. She had no choice. Out there was danger and poverty. In here she was captive, but at least Malik had a chance to get better. She swallowed the bile rising in her throat, her fists clenched at her sides. "Fine," she said, her voice brittle. "We stay. But this isn't a home, Darius, it's a prison. And don't you ever forget that I'm only here because you forced me to be." Darius held her gaze for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I don't care why you're here, Serenity," he said quietly, "as long as you're alive to be here." He turned and walked toward a hallway, dismissing her. "There are clothes in the closet in your room. Get dressed. The doctor will be here in 20 minutes. Serenity watched him go, feeling smaller and more trapped than she ever had in her life. The golden walls of the penthouse seemed to close in around her, beautiful, expensive, and unbreakable. The arrival of the medical equipment transformed the guest suite into a high-end private clinic, starkly reminding Serenity of the bizarre duality of her new life. Her stomach tightened as the specialists, whose services cost more than she made in an entire year, set up nebulizers and monitors around Malik's bed. Their hushed professionalism stood in sharp contrast to the chaotic fear that had defined her last 24 hours. Darius stood in the doorway, a silent sentinel in his dark T-shirt and jeans, watching the proceedings with the cold detachment of a general overseeing a troop movement rather than a host concerned for a child. Serenity hated him for it, hated how he treated their lives as items on a checklist to be managed. Yet when Dr. Thorne turned to her with a reassuring smile and told her that with this new regimen, Malik's lungs would likely heal within weeks. A wave of gratitude so intense swept over Serenity that it nearly buckled her knees, complicating her hatred with a sickening layer of indebtedness. Once the doctors left, leaving behind instructions and promises of daily check-ins, the penthouse fell into a suffocating silence. The vastness of the space seemed to amplify the forced intimacy of their situation. They were two strangers from opposite ends of the economic spectrum, locked together in a golden cage suspended above the city, bound by a secret that could get them all killed. Serenity retreated to the guest wing, trying to create some sense of normalcy for Malik. She unpacked the few meager belongings that Darius's security team had retrieved from her apartment: a tattered teddy bear, a few coloring books, which looked pitifully out of place against the Italian marble and silk wallpaper. Every time Serenity looked out the reinforced windows at the city below, she didn't see freedom. She saw a hunting ground, recalling the black SUV Darius had pointed out. She wondered if the men inside were still watching, still waiting for her to make a mistake. While Serenity paced the confines of her luxurious prison, 20 floors below, in a nondescript gray office building serving as a front for far less savory operations, Marcus Vance was staring at a frozen frame of security footage on a massive monitor. Vance was a man carved from granite and ambition, a corporate shark who found Darius Sterling's scruples amusingly outdated. He had orchestrated the meeting the previous night, the one that intended to bury Darius's empire. The image on the screen was grainy, taken from a hidden camera inside Darius's private office just moments after Vance and his associates had hastily exited via the private elevator. It showed a woman in a gray janitorial jumpsuit standing in the doorway, a look of terror plastered across her face, her eyes wide as she stared at something just out of frame: the evidence Vance had left behind. Vance dragged a perfectly manicured hand down his face, rage tightening his gut. This nobody, this cleaner whose name he didn't even know yet, was the loose thread that could unravel his entire meticulously crafted plan. She wasn't at the apartment in Queens. A voice rasped from the speakerphone on his desk, the report coming from the team in the black SUV. "We sat on it for 6 hours. The kid didn't show for school either. The place is empty, boss." Vance slammed his fist onto the desk, making the expensive Scotch glass jump. He knew exactly where she was. Darius had always been sickeningly noble, the type of man who would try to protect a stray dog he found in an alley. And now he had scooped up this witness and hidden her behind his fortress walls. "Sterling has her," Vance growled, his voice low and lethal. "He's stashed her in the penthouse. It's the only move that makes sense for a Boy Scout like him." Vance leaned closer to the screen, staring at Serenity's frightened face as if he could memorize her fear. "Change tactics. I want eyes on that building 24/7. I want to know who comes in, who goes out, and when the garbage is collected. Sterling can't keep her locked up forever. Eventually, she'll have to breathe fresh air. And when she does, we grab her. And if Sterling gets in the way, burn him down with her." Back in the penthouse, as evening deepened and shadows stretched into the corners of the vast rooms, the tension between Darius and Serenity curdled into an almost unbearable awkwardness. Dinner was served by silent, efficient staff at a dining table long enough to land a small plane on, emphasizing the emotional and physical distance between them. Serenity sat stiffly, picking at gourmet food that tasted like ash in her mouth. She was acutely aware of Darius sitting at the head of the table, 10 feet away, eating with mechanical precision, his attention focused on a tablet propped up beside his plate, scrolling through data streams and emails, completely ignoring her presence as if she were just another piece of expensive furniture he had acquired. The silence stretched until Serenity couldn't take it anymore. The fear, the gratitude, the resentment boiled over. "So this is it?" She challenged, her voice sounding thin and sharp in the cavernous room, causing Darius to pause with his fork halfway to his mouth. "We just sit here in silence until those men give up, until you decide we're not useful anymore." Darius slowly lowered his fork, turning his dark, unreadable gaze toward her, his expression one of mild irritation at being interrupted. "We sit here until I neutralize the threat, Serenity," he said, his tone patronizingly calm. "Which requires me to work, not engage in idle chatter. You wanted safety, you have it. Don't confuse my protection with a desire for companionship." Serenity flushed with anger, gripping her linen napkin tight enough to tear it. "I don't want your companionship, Darius. I want to know what's happening. I am not a child you can just pat on the head and tell to go play while the adults talk. My life is on the line too." Darius leaned back, his eyes narrowing slightly as he assessed her, seeing for the first time the steel spine beneath the janitor's uniform. "The less you know, the safer you are," he said coldly. "Your only job right now is to keep your son calm and stay out of my way while I fix the mess your curiosity caused." He stood abruptly, signaling the end of the conversation, and walked toward his study without a backward glance, leaving Serenity alone at the massive table, shaking with impotent fury in the heart of a golden cage that felt colder and more dangerous by the hour. The following week was a surreal study in contrasts for Serenity, a bizarre existence suspended between terrifying captivity and unimaginable luxury. The penthouse had become a fortress of silence and marble, its golden walls closing in on her day by day. Yet within those walls, a miracle was quietly unfolding. The advanced medical treatments and the pristine air filtration system Darius had installed worked with astonishing speed. Malik's persistent, rattling wheeze began to fade, replaced by the soft, steady rhythm of healthy lungs. His energy returned in a rush, the lethargy of chronic illness replaced by the boundless, chaotic energy of a healthy 5-year-old boy. He ran through the cavernous hallways, his laughter echoing off the high ceilings, oblivious to the danger lurking 20 floors below. Serenity watched his transformation with a heart overflowing with relief, a gratitude so profound it was physically painful. But it was owed to the cold, distant man who held them prisoner. She tried to hate Darius, to cling to the fear and resentment that were her only defenses, but it became increasingly difficult when every time she looked at her thriving son, she saw evidence of Darius's intervention. Darius remained a remote, intimidating figure, ghosting in and out of the penthouse at odd hours, his face a mask of corporate stoicism. Their interactions were limited to brief, chilly exchanges where he would demand updates on Malik's health like a CEO asking for a quarterly report. He never made eye contact. He never offered a word of comfort. Yet, Serenity began to notice cracks in his armor. Small, almost imperceptible shifts in the atmosphere when Malik was around. One evening, she found Malik in the living room, sitting on the floor surrounded by a complex magnetic building set that had mysteriously appeared that afternoon. Darius was sitting on the sofa nearby, ostensibly reading financial reports on his tablet, but Serenity noticed his gaze kept drifting over the top of the screen, watching Malik's small, determined hands try to construct a tower that kept toppling over. After the third collapse, Malik let out a frustrated sigh, his lower lip trembling. Without a word, Darius set his tablet aside and slid off the sofa onto the expensive Persian rug. He didn't take over, instead, he quietly began to hand Malik the correct pieces, offering low, calm instructions on structural integrity. "You need a wider base," he murmured, his voice lacking its usual metallic edge. "Like a pyramid, it's the strongest shape." Serenity watched, hidden in the shadows of the hallway, breath held. The ruthless billionaire and her son built a magnificent, towering structure together. The silence between them was comfortable and focused. When it was finished, Malik looked up at Darius with pure, unadulterated hero worship. For the briefest of seconds, Serenity saw the ghost of a genuine smile touch Darius's lips. The look was so unguarded and human that it made her chest ache. These moments became more frequent, small islands of connection in the sea of tension that defined their cohabitation. Darius started coming home earlier, his eyes seeking out Malik the moment he walked through the door. He would listen with surprising patience as Malik rambled on about dinosaurs or superheroes, asking serious questions that made Malik feel important. He never raised his voice around the boy, his imposing presence softening into a protective, almost gentle steadiness. Serenity watched this evolving dynamic with growing confusion and a terrifying flicker of something that felt dangerously like warmth. She saw how Malik thrived under this male attention, something he had never known, and it complicated everything. How could she reconcile the cold jailer who threatened her with the man who spent an hour patiently teaching her son how to tie his shoes? She found herself studying Darius when he wasn't looking, noticing the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried the weight of an invisible burden. She began to wonder about the man behind the billion-dollar facade, the man who was risking everything to protect them, even as he held them captive. One night, a violent thunderstorm rolled over the city, lightning illuminating the penthouse in stark, terrifying flashes, followed by thunder that shook the windows. Malik, always terrified of storms, woke up screaming. Serenity rushed to his room, but Darius was already there. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, gathering a sobbing Malik into his arms, rocking him gently. "It's just noise, little man," Darius was saying, his voice a low, soothing rumble against the storm. "Nothing can get in here. This building is stronger than any storm. You're safe, I've got you." He looked up as Serenity entered, and in the flash of lightning, she saw a fierce, protective intensity in his eyes that took her breath away. It wasn't the cold calculation of a businessman protecting an asset. It was something primal, something deeply personal. In that moment, watching him hold her terrified son, Serenity realized with a jolt that her fear of Darius was rapidly being replaced by a far more dangerous emotion. The golden cage was starting to feel less like a prison and more like a sanctuary, and the captor was starting to look. The fragile peace inside the penthouse, built on unspoken truces and the shared focus on Malik's well-being, was shattered the moment they had to step outside its armored walls. Malik's specialist, Dr. Thorne, insisted on an in-person follow-up at his clinic at Mount Sinai to run advanced scans that couldn't be done remotely. Darius, his face a mask of grim tension, orchestrated the excursion like a military extraction. He didn't just send a car, he led the convoy himself, Serenity and Malik bundled into the back of a reinforced armored SUV, sandwiched between two other identical vehicles filled with his elite security team. "Stay low, keep your head covered, and do not look out the window," he instructed Serenity, his voice tight, adjusting the bulletproof vest he had insisted she wear under her coat. Serenity, clutching Malik's hand so tight her knuckles turned white, nodded mutely. The reality of their situation crashed back down on her. The golden cage wasn't just to keep her in, it was to keep the monsters out. As the heavy garage gates rolled up and the convoy surged out into the chaotic Manhattan traffic, she felt exposed, naked, every pedestrian on the street a potential threat. The appointment itself was uneventful, a bubble of clinical calm in the center of the storm. Dr. Thorne was pleased with Malik's progress, his lungs showing remarkable improvement. But the journey back was where the tension coiled tight enough to snap. They were stopped at a red light, boxed in by a delivery truck and a yellow cab. Serenity, disobeying Darius's orders, glanced out the tinted window. Her heart stopped. Standing on the corner, staring directly at their vehicle, was a man she recognized instantly from that terrifying night in the executive wing, one of Vance's enforcers. He wasn't looking around randomly, his gaze was locked onto the rear window where she sat. He raised a hand to his ear, speaking into a device. "Darius," she choked out, grabbing his arm, her voice a terrified squeak. "He's there, on the corner, the man from the office." Darius didn't even look. "Get down," he roared, shoving her head toward her lap, covering Malik's body with his own. "Go now, get us out of here," he barked into his radio. The driver didn't hesitate. He slammed on the accelerator, mounting the curb to bypass the delivery truck, tires screeching, horns blaring in protest. The SUV lurched violently, throwing Serenity against the door. Behind them, she heard the sickening crunch of metal as the tail car in their convoy intentionally swerved to block a dark sedan that had peeled out from the side street, trying to pursue them. It was chaos, a blur of speed and shouting, and the terrifying realization that they were being hunted in broad daylight. Darius was a comm center in the storm, barking orders, his hand heavy and protective on Malik's back. They sped through red lights, weaving through traffic with terrifying precision until the towering glass spire of the Sterling building came into view, a beacon of safety. They tore into the underground garage, the gate slamming shut behind them like a steel jaw, cutting off the outside world. Only then did Darius pull Serenity and Malik out of the car, hustling them toward the private elevator, his face pale beneath his dark skin, his jaw set so hard a muscle twitched in his cheek. Back in the penthouse, the adrenaline crash was brutal. Serenity sank onto the sofa, her whole body shaking uncontrollably, clutching a bewildered but unharmed Malik to her chest. The illusion of safety was shattered. The golden cage felt fragile, the glass walls suddenly looking thin and breakable. Darius paced the living room like a caged tiger, ripping off his tie, barking furious orders into his phone. How did they know? Find the leak, fix it, and find that sedan. I want to know who was driving. He stopped pacing and looked at Serenity, his eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and something else, something that looked like fear. "You were seen," he said, his voice rough. "They know we're moving you. They know the security protocols." He ran a hand over his short hair, a gesture of rare frustration. "The threat level just went through the roof, Serenity. We are on lockdown, total lockdown. No one in, no one out, not even doctors." Serenity looked up at him, seeing the raw intensity in his gaze. For the first time, she truly understood the magnitude of what he was doing. He wasn't just holding her captive, he was standing between her and a bullet. He had just put his own body over her son's in that car. The lines between jailer and protector, villain and hero, were blurring into a confusing gray fog. "They're not going to stop, are they?" she whispered, the terror cold in her veins. Darius walked over to her, stopping just inches away. He reached down, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his gaze. His eyes were dark and fierce, burning with a resolve that was terrifying to behold. "No," he said softly, lethal intent radiating from him. "They won't stop until they get what they want. Or until I stop them." He let go of her chin, his hand lingering for a fraction of a second too long against her skin. "Get some rest. You're safe here. I promise you, as long as I am breathing, no one is getting past that door." He turned and walked away towards his study, the weight of the world on his shoulders, leaving Serenity staring after him, her heart pounding with a terrifying mix of fear for her life and a treacherous, growing reliance on the dangerous man who had just saved it. The penthouse, once a gilded cage, had transformed into a bunker. Following the terrifying ambush on the street, the atmosphere inside grew heavy, the air thick with unspoken tension and the constant, low-level hum of heightened security protocols. The massive windows, which once offered breathtaking views of the city, were now permanently obscured by heavy, light-blocking shades, turning high noon into perpetual twilight. The silence was deeper, broken only by the crackle of radios from the security team stationed just outside the front door, and the hushed, urgent tones of Darius's constant phone calls behind the closed doors of his study. Serenity felt the walls closing in, the luxury now feeling claustrophobic, every shadow in the vast apartment seeming to harbor a threat. Malik, sensing the shift in atmosphere, became clingy and anxious, asking repeatedly when they could go home, and why the nice man with the deep voice looked so angry all the time. Serenity had no answers for him, only forced smiles and hollow reassurances, her own nerves frayed to the breaking point. Darius had become a ghost again, but a more volatile one. The controlled, icy demeanor was gone, replaced by a simmering, restless energy. He paced the penthouse at all hours, his shirt sleeves rolled up, a perpetual scowl etched onto his face. He snapped at his staff over the phone, his voice a low growl of frustration. Yet amidst this storm, his behavior towards Serenity and Malik shifted again, becoming more complex, more confusing. He no longer ignored them. He was constantly tracking their movements, his eyes following Serenity with an intensity that made her skin prickle, not with fear this time, but with a strange, unsettling awareness. When he looked at Malik, the hard lines of his face softened into a fierce, protective mask. He started bringing Malik small gifts, a new puzzle, a book about space, clumsy peace offerings that spoke of a man unused to softness but desperately trying to bridge a gap. Serenity watched him, her initial hatred warring with a burgeoning, reluctant respect and a terrifying seed of attraction. She couldn't forget the feel of his body covering hers and Malik's in the car, the raw, physical reality of him putting himself between them and a bullet. The question that had been gnawing at her since the beginning grew louder, demanding an answer. One night, finding him in the kitchen staring blankly into the open refrigerator, the exhaustion radiating from him in waves, she decided to confront the elephant in the room. "Why are you really doing this, Darius?" she asked, her voice quiet in the vast silence of the kitchen. He tensed, slowly closing the refrigerator door but didn't turn to face her immediately. "I told you," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "You're a liability. I'm managing the risk." "No," Serenity said, taking a step closer, her heart pounding at her own boldness. "That's not enough, not for this. Not for turning your life upside down, for risking your own safety. You could have paid me off, sent me to Europe, made me disappear. Why keep us here under your nose where the danger is highest?" Darius finally turned, leaning back against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest. The kitchen island lights cast deep shadows across his face, making his eyes look impossibly dark. "You think you know how this world works, Serenity," he said, his tone devoid of its usual arrogance, sounding almost weary. "You think it's all black and white, villains and victims. It's not, it's all gray. And sometimes the only way to survive is to stay in the deepest shadow." "That's not an answer," she pressed, frustration mounting. "Are you one of them? Are you working with Vance? Is this all just some sick game to keep me quiet until it's convenient to dispose of me?" The accusation hung heavy in the air. Darius flinched, a flicker of genuine pain crossing his features before the mask slammed back down. "If I wanted you dead, Serenity, you would be dead," he said coldly, pushing off the counter and walking toward her. He stopped just inches away, invading her personal space, his sheer physical presence overwhelming. The scent of his cologne, mixed with the metallic tang of stress, filled her senses. I am the only thing standing between you and the people who want to silence you. You don't have to like me, you don't even have to trust me, but you do have to obey me. Because right now, my paranoia is the only thing keeping your son alive. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a husky whisper that sent a treacherous shiver down her spine. And stop looking at me like you're trying to figure out if I'm a monster or a savior. I'm neither. I'm just a man trying to clean up a mess. He held her gaze for a beat longer, the air between them charged with an unspoken, dangerous electricity that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the raw, undeniable pull between two people thrown together in a pressure cooker of danger. Then, he abruptly stepped back, breaking the spell. Go to bed. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. He turned and walked away, leaving Serenity alone in the shadowy kitchen, trembling not just from fear, but from the terrifying realization that the line between her captor and her protector was blurring, and that the man she should hate was becoming the only man she could rely on. While the air inside the penthouse thickened with unresolved tension and confusing emotional undercurrents, the net outside was tightening with terrifying speed. Marcus Vance sat in his dimly lit center of operations, a stark contrast to the sterile luxury of Sterling's tower, staring at a freshly decrypted data stream on his monitor. The near miss on the street hadn't been a total failure. His team had managed to capture a fleeting, encrypted burst of data from Sterling's secure comms just before the SUV vanished into the garage. It had taken his tech team 3 days to crack it, but the result was worth the wait. A geotag that pinpointed the origin of the signal not just to Sterling Tower, but specifically to the penthouse level. Vance leaned back, a slow, cruel smile spreading across his face as the realization hit him. Darius Sterling, the arrogant Boy Scout, hadn't smuggled the witness out of the city. He had hidden her in the sky, right above everyone's heads, in his own private fortress. It was arrogant, it was bold, and it was the mistake Vance had been waiting for. He thinks he's untouchable up there, Vance murmured to his lead enforcer, a hulking man cleaning a weapon in the corner. He thinks that glass and steel can stop us. Tonight we prove him wrong. Assemble the breach team, full tactical gear, silent approach. We go in through the roof. Ignorant of the storm gathering just a few miles away, the atmosphere in the penthouse changed abruptly when Darius received a call that shattered the fragile quiet of the evening. Serenity was in the living room, trying to focus on a book while Malik slept, when Darius emerged from his study, putting on his suit jacket with jerky, angry movements. His face was a thundercloud. I have to go out, he announced, clipping a sleek holster holding a sidearm onto his belt, a terrifying accessory to his tailored suit that sent a fresh wave of fear through Serenity. There's a critical situation at the server farm in Jersey, a physical breach. If I don't go personally to lock down the mainframe, everything Vance is trying to frame me for could become reality. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw genuine hesitation in his eyes, a war between necessary action and the protective instinct he developed. The penthouse is locked down tight. Brutus and the team are stationed outside the door and at the private elevator lobby. The windows are reinforced impact glass. You are safer here than anywhere else on Earth. He walked over to her, gripping her shoulders with an intensity that bordered on painful. Do not open the door for anyone. If the security system so much as beeps, you take Malik, you go into the panic room in the master closet, and you lock it from the inside. Do you understand? Serenity nodded, her throat tight with dread. His departure felt like the removal of a vital shield. Come back, she whispered involuntarily, the words escaping before she could stop them. Darius froze for a second, his eyes searching hers before nodding once curtly. "Count on it." He left, and the silence that descended on the penthouse was different this time. It felt heavy, pregnant with unseen menace. Without Darius's imposing presence filling the space, the vast apartment felt cavernous and vulnerable. Serenity couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She prowled the rooms, checking windows that were already obscured by blast shades, double-checking the lock on the front door that she couldn't even open without a biometric scan. Every creak of the building settling in the wind sounded like a footstep. 2 hours passed in agonizing slowness. She checked on Malik, who was sleeping peacefully, his breathing easy thanks to the purified air. She was just walking back into the living room, trying to convince herself her paranoia was getting the better of her when the lights flickered. It was just a second, a brief dip in power that dimmed the lamps and made the refrigerator hum stop. But in a building like this, with redundant backup generators, it never happened. Serenity froze in the center of the room, her heart slamming against her ribs. Then it happened again. Longer this time. And when the lights came back on, the ambient hum of the high-tech security system, the subtle electronic pulse she had grown accustomed to, was gone. The silence was absolute, terrifying. She ran to the wall panel that controlled the smart home features. The screen was dead black, no camera feeds, no status updates on the door locks. Panic exploded in her chest. She grabbed her phone to call Darius, but there was no signal, the line was dead. "Oh my God," she whispered, the reality crashing down on her. They weren't just having a power outage. They were being cut off. A sound from above made her jump violently, a muffled, metallic thud on the roof directly over the living room. It was followed by another, then the distinct sound of something heavy being dragged across the roofing tiles. They weren't coming through the door where Darius's guards were waiting. They were coming from above. The realization galvanized her into action. She sprinted to the guest wing, bursting into Malik's room. He woke up groggily as she scooped him out of bed, wrapping his blanket around him. "Mama, what is it?" he mumbled. "It's okay, baby. We're just going to play a game," she lied, her voice trembling, trying to keep the terror out of it. "We have to go hide in a special fort." She carried him into the hallway, heading for the master bedroom and the panic room Darius had mentioned. But she was too late. A massive, deafening boom shook the entire penthouse as shaped charges blew open the reinforced skylight in the main atrium. Glass rained down like deadly confetti, tinkling onto the marble floors. Serenity screamed, shielding Malik with her body, stumbling back against the wall. Through the gaping hole in the roof, thick black ropes dropped down, and dark figures clad in full tactical gear and gas masks began to rappel into the golden cage, landing on the expensive rugs with heavy, sickening thuds. The illusion of safety was shattered in an instant. The fortress had fallen. Serenity clutched her son, flattened against the wall in the shadows of the hallway, watching in horror as 4 armed men fanned out into the living room, their weapon lights cutting through the gloom, hunting for them. The lead figure scanned the room, his voice distorted by the mask, barking a single order that froze Serenity's blood. "Clear the rooms. Find the girl. Leave no witnesses." Adrenaline flooded Serenity's system, turning her fear into a cold, sharp clarity. The order to leave no witnesses echoed in her ears, a death sentence that galvanized every maternal instinct she possessed. She pressed Malik tighter against her, his small body trembling in her arms, and put a finger to her lips, silently begging him to remain quiet. The hallway where they hid was shadowed, but the beams of the tactical lights swept closer, slicing through the gloom like predatory eyes. The path to the master bedroom and the panic room was cut off. 2 of the intruders were already moving towards it, their heavy boots thudding on the marble. She had to move, had to find a temporary sanctuary, a place to hide Malik while she figured out a way to survive. Her eyes darted frantically, landing on the narrow door of a linen closet just feet away. It was a desperate option, a tiny space filled with towels and bedding, but it was dark and currently out of the line of sight. She moved with agonizing slowness, slipping inside with Malik and pulling the door shut until only a sliver of light remained. "Baby, listen to me," she whispered into his hair, her voice barely audible even to herself. "You have to stay here. Don't make a sound, no matter what you hear outside. Do you understand? Like the quietest mouse in the world." Malik nodded against her chest, his small hands gripping her shirt. "I promise, Mama." She kissed his forehead one last time, a silent prayer on her lips, and then pushed him deep behind stacks of Egyptian cotton sheets before slipping back out into the hallway. She couldn't hide with him. If they found the closet, they would find both of them. She had to draw them away. She needed a weapon. She was a janitor, not a soldier. She didn't know how to disarm a man or shoot a gun. But she knew this penthouse. She knew where the heavy objects were, where the chemicals were stored, where the shadows were deepest. She crept towards the kitchen, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. The kitchen was a chef's dream, gleaming with stainless steel and marble, and filled with potential weapons. She scanned the countertops, her mind racing. A block of expensive Japanese knives sat near the stove, but getting close enough to use one against armed men seemed like suicide. Then her eyes landed on a heavy, solid marble mortar and pestle set resting on the island. It weighed pounds. It would have to do. She grabbed the pestle, its cool weight grounding her, and pressed herself into the alcove between the industrial refrigerator and the wall, waiting. She didn't have to wait long. Heavy footsteps approached the kitchen archway. A beam of light swept across the cabinets, then landed on the floor, tracing the path she had just taken. A figure appeared in the doorway, tall and menacing in black tactical gear, the gas mask making him look inhuman. He stepped into the kitchen, his weapon raised, scanning the space methodically. He didn't see her at first, his attention drawn to the shimmering surfaces of the appliances. Serenity held her breath, her muscles coiled tight. He moved deeper into the room, past her hiding spot, towards the pantry. Now, she exploded from the alcove, closing the distance in 2 strides. Before he could turn fully, she swung the marble pestle with all the force of her terror and rage, aiming for the side of his helmet. The impact was sickeningly loud, a sharp crack that echoed through the kitchen. The man grunted, stumbling sideways, his weapon clattering to the floor as he crashed into the island. He wasn't unconscious, but he was dazed, shaking his head trying to clear it. Serenity didn't wait for him to recover. She saw the radio clip to his vest, squawking with static. She grabbed it, tearing it free, and threw it across the room towards the sink disposal unit. It clattered loudly in the sink. "Kitchen, contact in the kitchen," a voice yelled from the living room. The distraction worked, but now they knew where she was. She needed something bigger. Her eyes darted around frantically and landed on the bright red fire extinguisher mounted on the wall near the oven. It was a large, industrial-sized canister. She ripped it from its bracket, pulling the safety pin with trembling fingers. The dazed man on the floor was starting to push himself up, reaching for his fallen weapon. Serenity didn't hesitate. She aimed the nozzle at his face and squeezed the handle. A thick, powerful plume of white chemical foam blasted out, engulfing his head and shoulders. He roared in surprise and pain, thrashing blindly, coughing and sputtering as the chemicals coated his mask and gear. He fired a burst from his weapon wildly into the ceiling, the loud reports deafening in the enclosed space, plaster raining down. Serenity turned and ran, the heavy extinguisher clutched to her chest, heading out the other side of the kitchen towards the formal dining room. She could hear the other men shouting, running towards the gunfire. She had drawn them away from Malik, but now she was being hunted by 3 angry, armed professionals, and her only weapon was a half-empty fire extinguisher. She ducked behind a massive mahogany dining table, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The dining room was dimly lit, the shattered skylight in the adjacent living room providing the only illumination, casting long, eerie shadows. She could see the beams of their flashlights cutting through the smoky air, sweeping back and forth as they advanced from the kitchen. "Fan out, she's in the dining area," a voice barked. Serenity gripped the extinguisher tighter, her knuckles white. She was cornered. There were too many of them. Fear threatened to paralyze her again, but then the image of Malik hiding in the closet flashed in her mind, trusting her to keep him safe. A fierce, primal strength surged through her, burning away the panic. She wasn't just fighting for her own life anymore, she was fighting for her son S. They would not get past her. She rose from behind the table, hefting the fire extinguisher like a club, ready to swing. A tactical light hit her squarely in the chest, blinding her. "Target acquired," a cold voice said from the darkness. Serenity didn't flinch. She stood her ground in the center of the opulent room, a janitor in a t-shirt armed with fire safety equipment, facing down a squad of trained killers, ready to fight to her last breath to protect the child hidden in the walls of this glass fortress. The tactical light blinded Serenity, burning white-hot against her retinas, reducing the approaching threat to faceless silhouettes of impending doom. "Target acquired," the lead mercenary repeated, his voice devoid of humanity, stepping over the threshold of the dining room. Serenity tightened her grip on the fire extinguisher, her muscles coiled, ready to swing the heavy metal canister in a final, desperate act of defiance. She knew it was futile against armed men, but the image of Malik hidden in the closet fueled a primal rage that eclipsed her fear. If they wanted her son, they would have to step over her dead body to get to him. The lead figure raised his weapon, and Serenity braced herself for the end, squeezing her eyes shut, a silent apology to her son on her lips for failing him. But the shot never came. Instead, a deafening explosion rocked the penthouse, brighter and louder than the breach on the roof, as the main fortified front door was blown inward with tremendous force. Chaos erupted in the dining room as the mercenaries spun around to face the new threat behind them, their attention momentarily pulled from Serenity. Through the smoke and debris of the shattered entrance, a new team of figures surged in, moving with a lethal, practiced precision that dwarfed the clumsy brutality of Vance's men. Leading them was Darius Sterling, no longer the cool, detached CEO in a suit, but a force of nature clad in a tactical vest over his shirt, his face a mask of terrifying, cold fury. He moved like lightning, engaging the closest mercenary before the man could fully turn, disarming him with a brutal efficiency that spoke of elite training. Gunfire erupted, brief and deafening, echoing horribly in the confined space as Darius's security team, led by the massive head of security, Brutus, swarmed the remaining intruders. It was over in seconds. The mercenaries, outmatched and taken by surprise, were neutralized, left groaning on the marble floor in zip ties. Serenity stood frozen in the center of the violence, still clutching the fire extinguisher, her chest heaving, unable to process the sudden shift from victim to witness of this brutal rescue. Darius didn't spare a glance for the men he had just taken down. His eyes scanned the room wildly until they landed on her. The relief that washed over his face was so intense it looked painful. He holstered his weapon and rushed toward her, stepping over broken glass and overturned furniture, stopping just inches away, his hands hovering as if afraid to touch her and break her. "Serenity," he breathed, his voice hoarse, his eyes frantically searching her face for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you? Where is Malik?" The mention of her son snapped Serenity out of her shock. The adrenaline curdled into a toxic mix of fear and fury. She stumbled back from him, swinging the fire extinguisher up like a shield between them. "Stay away from me," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You're one of them, you brought this here, you brought these monsters to my son." The violence she had just witnessed confirmed her worst fears. He wasn't a businessman, he was a warlord, and she was just collateral damage in his violent world. "Where is my son?" she demanded, hysterical. "What did you do with him?" "He's safe." "I swear to you, he's safe if you hit him like I told you," Darius pleaded, holding his hands up in a placating gesture, desperation seeping into his tone. He looked around at the devastation of his home, at the unconscious men on the floor, and then back at her terrified, accusing face, realizing the corner he had painted himself into. "Serenity, please put that down and listen to me. You have it all wrong. I didn't bring this here. I've been trying to stop it." He reached into a pouch on his vest and pulled out a small, ruggedized digital recorder, pressing play. Marcus Vance's voice, smug and cruel, filled the silence of the dining room, detailing the plan to breach the penthouse, kill the witness, and frame Darius for the murder, all while taking over his company. Serenity lowered the extinguisher slightly, confusion warring with her fear as she listened to the undeniable proof of who the real villain was. Darius stepped closer, his eyes imploring her to believe him. "The night you saw me in the office," he said rapidly, needing her to understand. "That wasn't an illegal deal, it was a sting operation. I've been working with federal authorities for 6 months to gather evidence against Vance for corporate espionage and racketeering. I was handing off marked data drives to his intermediary to track back to him." He ran a shaking hand through his hair, the stress of the lie finally showing. "When you walked in, you ruined the operation. But worse, Vance's man saw your face. He reported back immediately. If I had let you walk out of that building that night, Vance would have had you killed before morning just to be safe. He doesn't leave loose ends." He reached out slowly and gently took the heavy fire extinguisher from her unresisting hands, setting it on the floor. "I didn't kidnap you to hurt you, Serenity. I kidnapped you to keep you alive. It was the only way to protect the only innocent witness to a federal investigation until we could take Vance down. I am not the villain here. I'm the guy trying to keep the villains from winning." The truth hit Serenity with the force of a physical blow, reordering everything she thought she knew about the last 2 weeks. The coldness, the secrecy, the high-tech prison, it hadn't been malice. It had been a desperate, clumsy attempt at protection by a man carrying the weight of their lives on his shoulders. The truth of Darius's revelation hung in the air, a heavy, complicated reality that Serenity struggled to align with the terror of the last 2 weeks. He hadn't been her jailer out of malice. He had been her unauthorized protector in a war she hadn't known she was fighting. But understanding his motives didn't instantly erase the fear, nor did it stop the frantic need to see her son. "Malik," she gasped, turning away from Darius and sprinting down the hallway, ignoring the debris and the security team securing the scene. She burst into the linen closet, falling to her knees as she pulled aside the heavy stacks of sheets. Malik was curled in the back corner, his eyes wide and terrified in the sliver of light, clutching the tattered teddy bear she had managed to save from their old life. "Mama," he whispered, trembling. Serenity pulled him into her arms, burying her face in his neck, sobbing with relief as she felt his warm, solid weight against her. "It's okay, baby. You did so good. It's over. You're safe now," she murmured fiercely, rocking him back and forth. She sensed Darius standing in the doorway behind them, a silent, hulking presence, watching the raw emotion of their reunion. He didn't try to intrude. He just stood guard, his own relief palpable in the way his shoulders finally slumped, the weight of their safety no longer solely on his back. The hours that followed were a blur of official activity that Serenity watched from a distance. Federal agents swarmed the penthouse, taking statements and processing the scene, leading away the sullen, defeated mercenaries. Vance was already in custody, picked up across town as his operation crumbled. Through it all, Darius stayed close to Serenity and Malik, shielding them from the chaos, his earlier coldness replaced by a quiet, steady protective presence. He moved them to an undamaged guest suite on the far side of the penthouse, ordering hot food and ensuring Dr. Thorne was called to check on Malik, who, exhausted by the excitement, fell asleep almost immediately in the massive bed. Only when the apartment was quiet again, the intruders gone and the broken glass swept away, did Darius finally sit down across from Serenity in the dimly lit suite. He looked exhausted, stripped of his corporate armor, just a man who had fought a hard battle. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, breaking the silence, his dark eyes looking directly into hers with a sincerity she hadn't seen before. "I never wanted to terrify you. I made a calculated decision that your fear was preferable to your death. I used my power to take away your choices because I didn't trust that you would understand the danger in time. It was arrogant, and it was cruel, even if it saved your life. You didn't deserve that." Serenity listened, feeling the last of her adrenaline fade into bone-deep weariness. She looked at this powerful man humbling himself before her, admitting his faults. "You saved my son's life," she said softly, looking toward the sleeping boy. "Not just tonight, the doctors, the medicine. You did that. I can't hate you for that, Darius. But you stole my life. You treated me like a piece on a chessboard." "I know," Darius admitted, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "When I brought you here, I saw a liability, a janitor who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, someone I needed to manage." He paused, shaking his head slowly, a look of genuine admiration crossing his face. "But tonight, watching you stand in that dining room with a fire extinguisher, ready to fight armed men to protect your boy, I didn't see a liability, Serenity, I saw a lioness. You are braver than any soldier I know. You didn't just survive this, you fought back." He reached into his pocket, but instead of a checkbook or a contract, he pulled out a simple, folded piece of paper and slid it across the coffee table toward her. "What is this?" she asked, eyeing it warily. "It's a proposal," Darius said, "but not the kind I forced on you before. It's an offer of employment. A real job in Sterling Corp's Foundation, running the new pediatric health initiative we're launching. It comes with a real salary, benefits, and a company apartment in a secure building, not a cage, a home. Malik's medical care is covered forever, regardless of whether you take the job or not." Serenity picked up the paper, her hands trembling slightly as she read the generous terms. It was freedom, it was security, it was respect. "Why?" she asked, looking up at him, overwhelmed. "It's over. Vance is caught. You don't need me anymore." Darius paused, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that spoke of more than just business. "I don't need you, Serenity," he said softly. "But Malik does. You both have a chance at something better now. I can't undo the past, but I can give you a future that's yours to control. I can give him the life he deserves." His voice hardened just slightly, as if the weight of his next words was just as heavy for him as it was for her. "This is not about my empire. This is about keeping a promise I made to myself, to protect you both from what's out there, what he wanted to do to you." Serenity sat back, her mind reeling from his offer and the magnitude of everything that had happened. The proposal in front of her, though tempting, still felt like another chain. She looked down at the paper in her hands, an offer for a new life in his world. It felt like a trap, but a part of her recognized that it was also the only lifeline she'd been given. Darius, sensing her hesitation, added, "I'm offering you something real, Serenity. A way out from everything you've been running from, but it's up to you. I won't force you to accept." Her eyes flicked back to Malik, still peacefully asleep in the other room. The child she had fought for, the child she had nearly lost. And yet, the thought of remaining in Darius's debt, of tying their futures to this man who had orchestrated both their rescue and their imprisonment, felt impossible. "I don't want to owe anyone," she said quietly, the words sounding fragile in the quiet room. "I just want my son to be safe." Darius took a step forward, kneeling slightly in front of her, the weight of his stature tempered by the vulnerability that flickered in his eyes. "Then take this. Not because you owe me, but because you owe it to yourself and to Malik. You've been surviving, Serenity. This is your chance to live." She stared at the paper in her hands again. It was more than a job, it was a promise, a chance to step out of the shadow of fear and uncertainty that had defined her life for too long. "I'll think about it," she said finally, the words barely escaping her lips. Darius gave a small nod as if he had expected that answer. "Take your time. I'll be here when you're ready." Serenity didn't know what she would choose or what path her future would take. But for the first time in weeks, the suffocating grip of the unknown loosened just enough to let her breathe. As Darius stood and walked toward the door, he paused, his hand resting on the doorknob. "Serenity," he said without turning, his voice softer than before, "whatever you decide, your son's future won't be a prison. I'll make sure of that." And with that, he left her alone with her thoughts, and the door between them closed, leaving Serenity to face the consequences of the choices ahead. Serenity takes the job offer from Darius, choosing the safety and future of her son over the shadows of her past. She builds a new life, free from the fear and control that once haunted her, starting afresh with Malik in a world of opportunity. Despite the complex past and uneasy trust, Serenity and Darius find a new understanding. And together, they provide a better future for Malik, with Serenity leading the Pediatric Health Initiative and reclaiming control of her life.
Thank you so much for joining us on this intense, thrilling journey of survival, redemption, and unexpected alliances. Serenity's story is one of courage, a mother's fierce love, and the power of second chances. Will she choose the safety offered by a man she once feared? Or will she risk it all for the freedom she's always wanted? Stay tuned for the next chapter in Serenity's new life as she discovers that sometimes, the greatest battles aren't fought with weapons, but with trust. Don't miss out on the rest of the journey. Subscribe now for more gripping twists and heartfelt moments. Join Serenity as she learns what it truly means to be free, and find out if she can ever truly escape the shadows of her past.